What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my still currently unnamed Star Wars book reading series. Last time we read Chapter 1 of Tales of Light and Life, The Queen's Bloom. Now we are heading on into Chapter 2. Hope you all enjoyed the first one, and it is time for the second one. So let's just hop straight into it. Last time, actually before we hop straight into it, just to give a quick refresher, last time our boy Axel Greylark fakes being sick in his school, and the what's her what's she called? What's her called? Dean, the dean of the school, Dean Harkett, is on to him, but she just can't quite prove him guilty yet. And after her and the nurse leaves, his sort of crush, Laylee, and his rival Cosmo both show up, and they're planning on going to the Queen's Bloom Festival over to the waterfront and to have a party, or to attend a party there for the Queen's Bloom Festival that's coming up. Alright. Time for Chapter 2. Reno University hadn't been Axel Greylark's first choice. He'd have preferred to go to Alderaan or remain on Coruscant. Yet, his mother had insisted that he grow a little character, being farther away from home. If he could survive the snotty royal children of the core worlds, he could survive anywhere. So he'd been shipped off to the prestigious university in the colonies. Within his first year of accelerated studies, he learned every nook and cranny of the towering buildings. The ancient halls of gleaming metal and glass that housed students from all over the galaxy. He learned the name of every groundskeeper, every cook, every lowly adjunct professor. He made sure they knew his name too. The thing was, he liked getting to know them. They had real stories and real problems. They had real lives that didn't include hosting a campaign donor and their terrible spouse for dinner. Perhaps that was why he and Laylee Romero had gravitated to one another. Even though Axel was born to the elite of the Corps, he struggled to follow the path that had been carved out for him before he was even born. Any child of his parents would have the best tutors, the best everything, and still be expected to apprentice in the Senate, to accompany the Greylarks on missions of peace, to make a meaningful contribution that shaped the future of the worlds he might never even visit. All because he was a Greylark and was expected to lead. He'd do all that, but in the interim, he'd have a little fun. As he led Laylee and Cosmo through a servant's corridor that ran from the East Tower to the fairgrounds, he chased the thrill that sparked in his stomach. Though that spark could very well have been the 3 Ouija fire peppers he'd eaten to give himself a fever. Axel waved at the Twilight janitor, who grinned and let the trio pass. "I've heard you pay off the servants so they won't snitch on you," Cosmo said, his voice echoing off the stone path. "Is that true?" "Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't." Axel had given the janitor a few credits, but it was only because he'd overheard the Twilight asking the dean for an advance on his wages to pay for his daughter's surgery, and the dean had refused. Besides, they weren't his credits, they were his parents'. Laylee squeezed Axel's hand as they reached the fairgrounds. Every year, the university took part in the Queen's Bloom Festival. Following a season of torrential rain, the whole of the planet erupted in color. Every field, mountainside, and garden flowered with incandescent blossoms. Axel understood the phenomenon was caused by some sort of photoproteins in the rainfall that caused the pollen to shine with bioluminescence when the petals first opened. It was rather pretty, he could admit, but he assumed it was just an excuse for the entire planet to throw a great big party that attracted tourists from all over the system. Reno University had its share of the festivities. They had a petting zoo of exotic breeds and food vendors offering salty, sweet treats. They had booths explaining the science behind the blooming, games for children, and performances from the school's many musical groups. Before he'd caught the Malengopox, Axel, who was quite proficient in the double vial, had been expected to participate. "Look, Jedi!" Laylee said brightly. Axel squinted against Rena's blazing sun and scanned the crowds for Laylee's point of interest. 3 Jedi, one ancient and 2 around his age, with braids dangling over the fronts of their robes, stopped a few paces away. They were being escorted by the Dean of Theological Studies, who was so fascinated by the Jedi Order that he'd been campaigning to have them attend the fair to prove a contested theory that there was a correlation between the Queen's Bloom phenomenon and the mystical ways of the Force. Axel thought it was all a bit hokey, but was grateful for the distraction the robed wizards provided. He mentally charted a path to the hangar at the other side of the fairgrounds. The only problem was Dean Harkett striding in his direction. Back to the East Tower, no doubt to check up on Axel. Laylee saw her too. "I've got this," she said, and grabbed Cosmo's hand. The two of them blocked the Dean's path while Axel ducked his head and let himself get absorbed in the throng. He pinched the hem of a scarf on a passerby, and it slipped from the woman's shoulders without her notice. Axel covered his head with the silk and pretended to pay attention to the Dean of Theology. When the way was clear, he turned in the direction of the hangar. One of the young Jedi, what were they called? Patties? Tadpoles? Got in his way and didn't even say, "Excuse me," when she knocked into his shoulder. He glanced back at her dark, lopsided hair knots. She stood at attention, despite clearly having been separated from her cohort. She rested her hands on twin lightsabers, and he felt his fingers twitch. Then he remembered Laylee was waiting, and he was fairly certain Cosmo would use any excuse to leave him behind. Axel kept running. When he reached the hangar, Cosmo was already powering up his luxury speeder. "You'll be thrilled to know Dean Harkett has entrusted me with checking up on you today, on account of us being such good friends and all. I knew it would eventually pay to put up with you," Axel muttered. He climbed into the back seat and spread his arms across the Nerf leather. "Let's go," Laylee laughed at that effervescent laugh of hers and glanced over her shoulder at Axel. He felt that tug in the back of his belly button again, that draw to be near her and give her everything she wanted. Cosmo blasted an electro trash song and peeled off down the rocky path leading away from the university and toward the long winding road to the city's coast. Laylee whooped and Axel howled as the salty breeze trusled his hair. Reena's numerous green islands dotted the blue waters that stretched out to the horizon. He'd traveled many places with his parents, naturally, but he'd never lived outside of Coruscant's glittering city. Though he'd never admit it out loud, there was something soothing about being away from the traffic, crowded streets, and flashing hollow billboards and tabloids. Reena wasn't the capital of the galaxy, but it was no backwater town either. The buildings of the historic waterfront gleamed at the sun. Axel was beginning to memorize the twists and turns of the streets full of passers-by and revelers. The whole city seemed ready to witness the Queen's Bloom phenomenon. They parked the speeder behind a 5-story building housing Ely's rooftop tavern deck, complete with a fountain overflowing with a drink the owner liked to call Giddy Tonic. I cannot speak right now. It was the first place Axel had discovered on his truant strolls about the city. Listening to pilots and traders tell stories about evading pirates on the Calorio run was certainly more entertaining than his political ideology on the Outer Rim seminar. Besides, he was learning about trading patterns and things they'd never teach in school. "Really? A tavern?" Cosmo sneered. He smoothed his palms down his embroidered silk tunic, then rested his palm on his Luzolite diamond medallion. Axel wondered how much that family heirloom was truly worth. "I have a better idea for premier views." Laylee tilted her gaze back to the Gorag Tower. The black and gold building spun into a needlepoint that pierced the sky. "The House of Reina owns that penthouse," Axel said, stating something they all knew. Even he wasn't bad enough to crash a royal party. Or was he? Laylee gripped his forearm. "Oh, come on, Axel. You're you. You could walk in without an invitation and just say the Greylocks of Coruscant have arrived." He'd never say that, but there was something encouraging about the pressure of her hands on his arm. The way she looked at him. She blinked long, violet lashes, and he knew, even before he said anything, that he was going to say yes. It also helped that Cosmo was sitting on the hood of his luxury speeder rolling his eyes. Cosmo might be a lord from a little-known planet, but Axel was a Greylark, and that meant something, didn't it? He felt the thrill again, sparks igniting in the pit of his stomach. Follow me. They crossed the street and entered the cavernous hall of the Gorak Tower. Axel offered Laylee his arm and delighted in her twinkling laugh that filled the lift as the three of them shot right up to the top floor. Waiting when the door swooshed open was a nervous Wormel in a tux, a datapad in one hand. He unhooked his monocle from a breast pocket and peered from Axel to the guest list. Name? He asked in a high-pitched voice. Greylark, Axel answered, standing just a bit taller, a bit more serious. It was the way his father prepared himself before entering the Summit Chamber or enduring long, boring fundraiser dinners at home. And he was the spitting image of his father, Lexier Greylark. For a moment, guilt threaded between his ribs, tying together the anxiety that rushed Axel's better senses. Did he have better senses? Was this Wormo really going to buy it? And what would happen if he was caught? His mother had warned that if he got another complaint from the Dean... Ah, yes, Wormman said, looking at Greylark family ring on Axel's index finger. Your wife is already here. My wife? Axel realized at once the fault in this plan. His mother was there. Before he could turn back, the lift already returned with a new gaggle of guests, and Laylee and Cosmo were forcefully guiding him into the party. He barely had a moment to take in the gilded chandeliers, the three-piece band harmonizing from a raised die, the partygoers from all over the galaxy picking tiny bites from passing trays. Every server wore a bright white uniform and a metallic visor across their eyes that obscured the top half of their heads. He'd heard the House of Rena preferred organic staff to server droids, but he found it unnerving not to be able to look into their eyes. Axel turned the first corner of the massive penthouse, snatched a glass flute filled with steaming green liquid, and raised it to his lips. Is that her? Cosmo whispered, making terrible work of being surreptitious. That was when he saw her. Kyong Greylark was dressed in a pale lavender dress. Her hair was braided into an elegant crown that continued over her shoulder. Axel cursed, and used Cosmo, of all people, to shield himself from view. Your mother is stunning, Laylee said. My mother is going to kill me, Axel muttered. Of course she had to show up and ruin his day with Laylee. She's not even supposed to be here yet. She said she had to campaign on the other bleeding side of the galaxy. Oh, that's rather sweet. Laylee brushed the back of her index finger across the mound of his cheekbone. For the first time that day, he didn't feel that spark at her words and touch. He felt a strange hollowing sensation. What was sweet about his parents being on a planet a day early? Why had they come to Rena and, instead of seeing him, marched off to a party? Did it bother him because his nemesis and his girl were witnessing the very same thing? What did he care what Cosmo thought? He sipped the misty green drink. He grimaced at the sour kick and it set back on a passing tray. Say, we could have gone to Ares. But we have the best view of the King's Bloom, Laylee said, using the flat of her palm to stack as many canapes as possible. One seemed to be pink foam on top of a fried caterpillar. I thought you, the Coruscant Prince, loved these kinds of revelries. Cosmo snorted, and behind his gloved fist, and Axel felt heat crawl up the sides of his neck, all the way up to the tips of his ears. Darling, you said you wouldn't call me that. Her eyes crinkled with delight. And I told you not to call me darling. Point taken. He let it lie. He had to keep them moving to avoid colliding with his mother. They skirted a couple of people dancing, but when they turned around another pillar, there was Lexier Greylark himself. He fiddled with Moonopal cufflinks, likely having just been given a hard time by the Wormel. But when he saw his wife, he smiled. Axel flattened himself against the nearest wall, between two leafy plants. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He half considered coming up with an elaborate lie and revealing himself to his parents. He'd say he was on a field trip to see the phenomenon, but no, that wouldn't work. There were too many variables out of his control. We can go, Cosmo said. There's something like pity in his deep brown eyes. We came, we saw. Fine, Lily said. You two are no fun. Axel began calculating route from one end of the penthouse to the lift, but everything put him in his parents' view. Go without me. I live here now. It was nice knowing you. Lily smirked, showing a glint of something Axel had always liked about her. Impulsive, fun, cunning, clever. This way. Let's take the kitchen exits. They cut a path through the excited crowd and strode into the large kitchen. Trays and trays of tiny, foamy food were ready to be served. There was no screaming chef, no assembly of line cooks at their stations. All were bound and gagged and being marched into the walk-in freezer by a human woman and a Twi'lek male holding them at blaster point. Blasters that then turned on him. Okay, that is the end of Chapter 2. So, things are finally starting to get interesting. And in the next one, I guess we will find out what happens. I don't know, I'm acting like I don't know. I already know what happens. I've read this already, but y'all will find out what happens to Axel and his friends bumping into whatever crime is going on. So, thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys next week with Chapter 3. Goodbye.